Are the playoffs hurting college football? Who should enter the transfer portal after the playoff? And we give you some early freshman and supplemental draft targets. Campus to Canton is on right now. It's Felix, Sharpe, and Chris Moxley for CampusToCanton.com. Recording here this video during, what is it, the Peach Bowl, Texas and Arizona State. I want to get in to the playoffs, but before we do that, I hope you like what we're doing. We're trying to spread the good word of college fantasy football. So if it's your first time here, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, like the video, and yeah, I think that's we're trying to get to 5,000. We're trying to get to 5,000 to show the powers that be that there's interest in college fantasy football. Chris, I wanted to start the conversation here because I saw a tweet. I think it's CFB Home on Twitter, who I'm sure you follow and all of us follow. They quote tweeted a Colin Cowherd criticism of the college football playoff. And basically Cowherd was saying that please just give me an interesting game here in the playoff. And CFB Home's response was like, I'm tired of people who don't love the game of college football, commentating on it or something like that. I think that that's a lot of gatekeeping because what Colin Cowherd is saying is right. I think unequivocally, the playoffs have been a snoozer. The game we're recording through right now, Texas and Arizona State, it seems like it's going to be a blowout. There hasn't been a good game yet. And Chris, I just don't think that this first year of the 12-team playoff has grown the game kind of the way that the WNBA has grown in the last 2 years. I don't think that college football is great, but I don't think that you can, and I'm not saying that the playoff is bad for college football. It has just not brought more casual viewers into the space.
I find it a little ironic that media members are complaining about a media product that was built for the media to generate content. Like, I don't know. There's just like a layer of irony here, especially with Cowherd. I do think the poor product through, thus far was kind of inevitable. And I don't know that it's ever going to change. I think how you change it is eliminate the seeding, like auto bids or auto buys, I should say, for conference champions. Seed them correctly, but you're still going to get these games. Like, these games are inevitable, and they want to expand it again to 16, so it's going to happen, right? There's no interest in producing a better product at the end of the day. That's just the fact. I do think I think there are people who dislike the sport that are currently covering it, and I think that's true. Is Colin Cowherd one of those people? Maybe. Is Kirk Herbstreit one of those people? Yeah. Like, there are people who don't like this iteration of the sport and intentionally want to change it and make it worse and do all of these things. Like, they hate college football and they cover it. It's a really weird dynamic. And I think Herbstreit's the number one offender with this. Like, all of his Alabama talk and Indiana shouldn't be in and all of that is like, this is the sport, buddy. Like, you should enjoy aspects of it. And I just feel like there's none of that across the media, especially with the SEC bias. I think there's a lot of that permeating through. Like, it's not really interested in growing the sport. It's really just all agendas.
My pushback is that just because someone criticizes the thing doesn't mean that they don't enjoy it, they don't love it. Like, that's my only pushback. We really think Kirk Herbstreit. Now, he could be wrong on his opinion. Yeah, Indiana deserved to be there. Obviously, we saw what happened to Alabama, but I think the people that are commenting on the game, they just want to get the best competitive product on the field. I think that's what Kirk Herbstreit's comment. And we might talk to Kirk here later on. He's been sitting here waiting in the green room.
Yes, yeah.
But
I'd like to get his opinion on this because I don't know that I totally agree. Like, I don't know that Colin Cowherd and Kirk Herbstreit have the best interest of the sport in mind at the end of the day. Like, I don't know that that's necessarily true. And I don't know, that doesn't mean that they hate the sport. It's just, I think that they have a lot of issues with the sport itself that come out as hatred rather than like a genuine willingness to improve the sport. Like, that's where I think we fall on the line of like, we're saying, hey, we want the playoffs to be better because we want to see the sport grow. We want like the best product. the most deserving teams, who at the end of the day should be there and give us the best games. I don't know that some of the media really is interested in that sort of discussion, because there's a lot of conversation that seems antithetical to that point, which is like the whole who should be in over Indiana conversation. To me, that's not what's best for the sport. I'm advancing my own thing, and I don't like the way that the sport is currently constructed. I don't know. It feels more self-serving than anything.
Listen, football, I'll watch any game. I'll go to a high school game on Friday night and watch two teams play. So I love football. It doesn't matter, who's on the field. But I think when the playoff was implemented, and I said this a few weeks ago, I think that there was some romanticizing of that Boise State over OU game, Appalachian State over Michigan, and can Eastern Michigan win a national championship like you can do in the college football game? The answer to that question is unequivocal. Is like no. It's no. Boise State can't win a national championship game. I don't know if Indiana can either, and it's just because even if they have great seasons, just along the line of scrimmages, they're not competitive. We saw it yesterday. They're not competitive. Penn State and Boise State, they're not competitive. And it's just because of the players that are, you can have an Ashton Genty. You can have a Titus Young, a Kellen Moore one year, an Austin Pettis. You can have a Micah Hughes at Tulane. But it's really the names along the line of scrimmage and those sizes and weights that they recruit that you, from a fundamental standpoint, it's hard to be competitive because you're losing the blocking and tackling game fundamentally. And so square one, we're not going to see Boise State win a national championship unless they start recruiting, 330-pound guards and 275-pound defensive ends. I just don't think that we'll see it. And Chris, you're shaking your head.
No, I mean, I agree. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, or how many teams can actually win a national championship?
Right.
Like 4, 5, 6. I mean, maybe in a year like this where there's a little more parity, 8. Boise's never good. I think Boise and Indiana can win a college football playoff game, like if a bunch of things break correctly.
Yeah.
I don't know that they can win multiple. Upsets happen all the time, right? Like big upsets happen a lot in college football. There's just so much variance in the sport. One game, like anything can happen. You're not going to win a national championship. That's it, right? You don't have the resources, you don't have the money, you don't have the boosters, you don't have these war chests that Texas has. Texas is spending $20 million plus on their roster. Ohio State's spending $20 million plus on their roster. How much is Boise spending? 5? Well, maybe 5. Like I don't know. No. It's certainly not double digits in the millions, right? Like you have such a wealth gap in terms of who your alumni base is, who your big boosters are. It's never going to get close, right? It's only probably expanding at the very top from like the top 5 to maybe the top 10, top 15. Like you're seeing talent kind of spread out a little bit more, but you're seeing the discrepancy between the bottom like 30 or the top 30 and like the bottom 100 continue to grow. Like those programs just don't have resources and they're not getting them. Like you fundamentally cannot compete when there's a 15 million gap in terms of talent on the field. Like that's it.
I just want to say this one more thing is that I think when we respond to whether it's Kirk Herbstreit, Colin Cowherd, whomever, when we kind of attack them for their opinions, I think that because they haven't been watching the game, I think that hurts the game grow. Like I'm just want to compare this to the WNBA. The WNBA the last 2 years, because of Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, a lot of new people weighing in on the game who haven't been watching the last 10 years. That is good for the business. That is good for the sport. I don't think we want to shout those people down. Now, it's fine to respond to them however you – but it is absolutely good for the business of the WNBA, or in this case, college football, for more people, for casual fans – to be in casual sports commentators to actually be talking about it. That's good for you and I as owners of the company. I don't think that should be lost. And when I'm seeing Colin Cowherd talk about college football, whether if it's in the good context or the negative context, that's good for me as having an interest in college football. That's good for you as having an interest in college football.
See, I agree to an extent, and the one thing I'll say on it is, I think that only like I know you well enough to think that all press is or all what is it all attention is good attention. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad.
Publicity is good.
Oh, publicity is good publicity. Yeah, I don't necessarily agree. Right? If you're having some of the biggest names and brands in the sport saying how much it sucks, like, I think you're going to turn a couple people away, and maybe some people aren't going to watch this weekend that were interested.
It's true though. They're not, Chris. We are
not providing solutions. They're not interested in a truly, at the end of the day, debate. Like even playing field. Everybody is coming with their own agenda, and I don't think that agenda is the best version of the sport in mind. And I think those two specifically are guilty parties.
They are. That's our job, though. It's our job to come up with the solution as the people who track this sport, religiously. I don't care if Colin Cowherd is saying that the playoffs has been boring, because they have. Christopher, we're recording this during the Peach Bowl. If each of the playoff games had been like won by a field goal and been competitive, we'd be like, oh, we'll record that later on tonight. We would have. We're recording it during a game because we don't think the game is going to be particularly competitive.
I think that's fair. You know what? The product hasn't been good this year. I think you can go back to the drawing board and make alterations. But, and I said it last time too, there's no interest in improving the sport. It is all about money right now.
All about money. Chris, help us make some. I don't even know how to do it. I was trying to make a transition there. I couldn't come up with it. I want to move on here to talk about the transfer portal. Now, obviously, the transfer portal is closed for 128 FBS teams, but the teams in the playoffs. Those players, once the playoffs conclude, they can actually enter the transfer portal. Who do you think, Christopher? And there's a big name here at the top that you think should enter the transfer portal following the playoff.
I mean, there's no way that Texas enters the 2025 season with Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers on the roster. They're just like, financially doesn't make sense. Playing time doesn't make sense. Like there's no world where this happens. So does Quinn Ewers declare? I don't know that he had a good enough season to declare. I don't know that he's put enough on tape to declare. If he declares, is he going to make more money than transferring to a Miami, who is looking for their quarterback? Is Quinn Ewers going to transfer to somewhere and get $5-6 million? Because that's what the reports are that he's being offered. And Jonte Cook shot that down and said, yeah, right, I wouldn't pay this bum that. Kind of weird that he came out when he couldn't get on the field. But I mean, if you're Quinn Ewers, you're playing elsewhere in college football, I think, next year. I think the answer might be Miami. I think the answer might be a school that's going to give him $5+ million. And there will be a school that does that.
One, it's weird that Miami doesn't have a quarter. They only have Emory Williams on the field, on the roster, because I think Reese Puffenbarger entered the transfer portal again. And I actually like Reese Puffenbarger.
Reese Puffenbarger transferred to somewhere.
Where? Okay, we got to look that up here because I need to react to that. I really want to see Reese Puffenbarger play. I actually have Reese Puffenbarger roster in a couple of places. But yeah, of course, your boy Quinn Ewers, because if you have more than one share, if you have one share of Quinn Ewers, you should have fewer. Your boy Quinn Ewers, we've talked about this for a long time. He's not going to go to the NFL because he's not an NFL caliber player. He's definitely not a first round caliber player. I told you this 3 years ago, watching his tape there at South Lake. I saw the same thing with your boy Sam Heward. I'm like, this dude is just hitting. He's facing no pressure, just making layups. That doesn't tell me anything about the player's ability to adapt. Now, he's been fine as a game manager.
I really think the injuries set him back. So if he comes out, has a healthy year, and regains some of that arm strength that seems to be lacking on his film, maybe. But I mean, it just doesn't make sense for him to declare. He's not going round one. I think he's a round 3 quarterback at the end of the day. I think that's where he will get drafted.
And I can't think off the top of my head. I'm trying to think of. So Miami last year, they brought in Sam Brown. They brought in Damian Martinez. They already had Xavier Restrepo, Elijah Arroyo. Miami doesn't seem. They haven't made big moves here in the transfer portal to date. So if Quinn Ewers went there, you're talking about JoJo Trader, and I'm trying to think of who else. Who's Jacoria? Oh shoot, I'm forgetting names off the top of my head. But point being is, I don't think that Miami is making the moves that they were making last year to seemingly set up bringing in a Cam Ward, thinking that they were going to bring in a big, final piece to that puzzle. It doesn't seem like Miami is doing that this year. I could be mistaken.
Well,
Jacoby George, that's who I was.
How much appetite?
Jacoby George.
Oh yeah, how much appetite is there to bring in a very competitive class after what we just saw, right? Like Miami didn't make the playoff; they should have been in the playoff. Probably the best roster in the ACC, didn't make it. Spent a ton of money doing so. Mario is a bonehead. Like, what are you? What
they had the best offense in the country. They had one of the best. They didn't make the playoffs, but that was a good football team this year. A good offensive football team.
Defense was terrible. Yeah. So the only player that they brought in terms of weapons is CJ Daniels from LSU. And CJ Daniels hurt part of the time, but we've been seeing with the Tigers. And I mean, they lost Isaiah Horton in Alabama too. It's not like they retained him, and that would have been a good keep. And they also, so are they going to roll with Emory Williams at 125? I find that really hard to believe because that dude is not a starting quarterback at Miami level player. Reese Puffenbarger, the North Texas Mean Green quarterback.
Oh, he's replacing Morris. Chandler Morris. Oh, that's gonna be. He might be we might have to say his name later on.
I think you're right. Yeah, but I mean, who's gonna go to Miami? Is the answer Quinn Ewers? I feel like that's a very logical fit. I don't know that it would happen.
All right. Well, and we should say there are reports that there's a quote unquote a Big Ten team that is soliciting Quinn Ewers' services. I mean, I think that's very clearly Ohio State. No. So
you think that Ohio State is not going to keep one of the 50 quarterbacks they have on their roster? And
I mean, if you've got Jeremiah Smith, and obviously Ohio State every single year wants to be in it, are you going to give Julian Sand the keys to Jeremiah Smith, or would you want to give it to an upperclassman who's actually started some games? I think you'd want to give it to the upperclassman. I
mean, if you believe the reports that Julian Sand looked the best in camp, then maybe you want to get Julian Sand in. I don't know that I believe those reports.
And because every time we've seen Julian Sand, even when he got in a couple of, was it the playoff game when he got in here late and he's just throwing the ball into the dirt again, like we saw in the spring game,
I don't know that you can run it back with that quarterback room. To be honest, it just doesn't. It doesn't make sense if you're trying to compete. They're bringing in Tavian St. Clair. Yeah. I don't know that you want to start him. You're wasting a year, I think, if you keep the current quarterback room at Ohio State. That's the reality. But do they want to even pay another $30 million for a roster again that, if they don't win this year and they're knocked out today, how much appetite is there? Is Ryan Day going to really wow the boosters? I don't know. There's a lot of questions about both those rooms.
There's never been such a disconnect between what we see from a player and what we hear what we actually see on the field versus what we hear in practice than Julian Sand. Because every time we see Julian Sand, I'm like, this dude does not he has a super weak arm. Can't, outside the number, outside hash throws, just completely out of the question. Just completely out of the question.
That's how I felt about, what's his name? Brock Vandegrift. At Kentucky this year. Everybody's talking about how great he looked. I'm like, we talk about the same player?
No, because the first year, I remember this very distinctly. The first year at Georgia, they were behind. It was Brock Vandegrift and Carson Beck were in the same class. Behind Stetson Bennett, in the first spring game, Carson Beck went first. Then Jackson Muschamp was the third quarterback on the field, and then Brock Vandegrift. I'm sure
Jackson Muschamp was on scholarship either at that point.
I don't think he was. And then it was Brock Vandegrift, and he looked terrible. He looked terrible.
It's just these people get way too attached to the stars and recruiting rankings, and at some point you just need to throw those priors away. Quinn Ewers.
Who else you got? Do you think they should enter the portal?
Yeah, this would be post spring. So the quarterback is kind of you really don't want to bringing in a quarterback at the end of so the portal opens April 15th. Do you really want to bring in a quarterback and not have that much time I think there's two names that kind of stick out to me. One is Jalen Milroe. We watched Jalen Milroe yesterday in that game against Michigan, if you want to call it a game from Alabama. I don't know. I watched Jalen Milroe, and I did the same thing last year too, and I said, this dude just isn't a good quarterback. Like, this dude can't play quarterback at the next level. And he has so many awesome athletic traits. Like, he's an elite rusher. Like, he's built. He's a nice arm. Like, dude just isn't a quarterback at the next level. Like, I don't know what to tell you. So I don't know that Kayla DeBoer wants to run it back again with Jalen Milroe. Like, I find it really hard to believe that that's his ideal path forward. Is Ty Simpson the answer? Probably not. Right. But is Austin Mack the answer? Probably not. But I don't think it's Jalen Milroe. I just don't think you can win a national championship currently with Jalen Milroe as your quarterback. He just doesn't. He just can't get you there. His last two games have been dreadful. Michigan, inexcusable loss. Oklahoma, inexcusable loss.
There are not. If you think about what college football is going to look like in 2025, Oregon's going to have a new quarterback, and I think that they're going to be fine. But Ohio State is going to have a new quarterback, and as that roster sits right now, I think they're going to be shaky. Alabama, right now, going to be shaky. Miami, going to be shaky. I mean, it's a lot of like blue blood programs that don't have an elite arm. I mean, we're talking about Sam Leavitt being a top 5 quarterback, and that's why. I mean, it's really part of some of the attrition that we've seen in college football, and the fact that even after the playoff is done, there aren't a whole lot of options to go for Ohio State to go get a quarterback unless they're going to use somebody on the roster.
Yeah, I don't know where a lot of these teams go, because I don't know that Jalen Milroe is the chosen guy. I don't know that Quinn Ewers is the chosen guy. Like, I don't know that these coaches want to run it back with these guys, especially Milroe and DeBoer, because that's not his guy, right? Like, he brought in Austin Mack. Don't think it's Austin Mack. I just don't know where you go, though. There's just isn't quarterback talent currently. It's a really, really thin quarterback landscape. You want to know who Alabama should bring in? They should bring in Lenore Sellers. That's the answer. If you really want to like galaxy brain it, like that's what I would do if I was Alabama. You basically get a better thrower and not quite an equivalent rusher, but someone you could run your QB run stuff with.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the teams in the playoff now. Bo Pabula has already entered the transfer portal. You know, I've seen
quarterback, but okay.
Right. Well, he went to Missouri.
Well, yeah, he is going to play in the SEC. He is not an SEC level quarterback.
Michigan has Bryce Underwood. Alabama's the Mack and Simpson, as you said,
and Keelan Russell. Maybe what they want to do with Keelan Russell next year.
Well, and then Oregon has both Austin Novosad and Dante Moore. I mean, Novosad saw Dante Moore come in. He could have entered the transfer portal last offseason and he didn't. So maybe he thinks he's going to compete for that job. And I don't know that he's not going to. I mean, Austin Novosad is probably an underrated player as far as value goes if he's available in your campus to Canton leagues.
I think that's a really good spot for Quinn Ewers, Oregon. They really don't need him to do a whole lot in that offense.
Yeah. It's just like Texas. I mean, Quinn is going to enter. There's nobody behind Sam Leavitt at Arizona State. So it's just, and then Notre Dame and Georgia, could you have Jaden Rashada or Puglisi enter the transfer portal? I mean, maybe, but I don't know that those are attractive options either.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And Notre Dame wants to run it with CJ Carr next year. They've basically made that unofficially official. I don't know that I would do that, but
I mean, he's looked good when he's looked better than Julian Sand has looked when we've seen him. So
that's true, but I mean, you know who really should enter the portal and just go like straight G5 is Jaden Davis. Michigan didn't even play him. They had Alex Orji drop him back yesterday. Like, how bad is this dude?
He says he loves competing. He's going to compete for the job, the starting job,
the third string job. Okay.
Yeah. All right, you got anybody else who should enter the portal out of these playoff teams?
It's just a kind of. I think Gunnar Stockton's going to enter the portal. I don't think Georgia can run it with him next year. I just don't think he's that level of player. I wonder what the Texas situation is like. Trey Wisner, CJ Baxter. I assume they're both coming back. Baxter's been out the whole year.
Yeah.
What does that split look like? Jalen was probably declaring. So, there's quite a few backup situations, and like who's gonna be the second string that I think they'll need to sort out, because one of Mack and Simpson's gonna enter the portal too, along probably with Milrow.
Yeah,
those are post spring, but like still.
I love college football for the fact that we get the spring season, and a lot of stuff happens in the spring as far as reports go, depth charts, and in those spring we see what the players look like in the spring games. Where like we don't like the lull, quote unquote lull in college football is what, between now and February, because they start spring practice in March, and then the spring games are in April. So we're going to get a lot of information here in 60 days or so. Yeah. All right. Speaking of the spring season. For those who haven't been around for a long time, Campus to Canton leagues are a fantasy league where you have both a college and an NFL team, and when your college players declare for the NFL draft, to the extent they do, they're added to your NFL team. But you can draft anybody. You can draft freshmen. You can draft a guy at ECU, whomever. And so every single year after you do your startup drafts, there are freshman drafts, but there are also players who have not rostered the previous season. You can take those guys. So, some examples that I can think of off the top of my head that have been really, high-end supplemental draft picks in freshman drafts: Carson Beck, Ladd McConkey, Justin Jolie last year coming from UConn going to NC State.
Cam Ward was a top 3 pick.
Cam Ward was he was coming out of Incarnate Ward. And that's one we got right, by the way. So we saw his talent. That's one, and he's going to end up being a top 5 NFL draft pick. But Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter were supplemental draft picks because they were at Jackson State, so they weren't rostered in a lot of places. So there's like Mayor this last year. I mean, the list goes on and on. There's a lot of value in drafting non-freshmen who are there in the player pool that you can take. So Mox, who are some guys that you think that you're targeting here as we get ready? We're not there yet, but as we get ready for freshman and supplemental draft season.
Yeah, I think my top guy is a receiver that showed a little bit of chemistry with Dylan Raiola, and that's Ja'Cory Barney. I was impressed kind of the whole season with what he was able to do as a true freshman. When you are making that kind of impact, and I wouldn't say it's a great room, but there is talent in the Nebraska receiving room, and he was able to kind of break out and do a couple nice things. Now, he didn't have a great bowl game, whatever. I think there's a good chance he's a wide receiver 1 in Nebraska. And I think this is more of a NFL play than it is a CFF play. Like, I don't know that the leading receiver in Nebraska is going to have 1,000 yards. Maybe if Hogo stays and they run his offense, possibly. But I think he is someone who has next level talent. Like, he's a good player.
Ja'Cory Barney had 477 yards receiving and 130 yards rushing. He also had 3 touchdowns on the ground. He had 3 punt returns. He had 14 kickoff returns for 285 yards. And I know this doesn't count, but he also had a kickoff return in the spring game for a touchdown there for Nebraska. I told you this before we started recording. He reminds me a little bit of Zay Flowers. Not only in play style, but I remember in my very first C2C league in 2020, I want to say it was 2020, came across this freshman as I'm looking for players and not really knowing how to play C2C, and seeing how Zay Flowers performed as a freshman, and it's very much how the way Ja'Cory Barney has performed. So, I like that pick, and if he's not rostered, would you spend a pick 8 through 12 on Ja'Cory Barney in the first round?
No, I don't think you have to either. Like, I don't think people are lining up to take Ja'Cory Barney in freshman drafts, to be honest. Like, he just didn't have a big enough year. Who goes higher, him or Emmett Mosley? Because he's another guy on my list, and I think it's Mosley because like Mosley had a big year. I think Barney's a better player. I do too, and I think more people have heard Emmett Mosley's name for some reason, even though he's on the West Coast. Yeah, that's giant game at the end of the year, and then he had also, like 2 other big games too. He had versus Louisville. He had 13 receptions for 168 yards and 3 touchdowns, and then he finished the season with 100
with 101 yards and 1 touchdown. So, yeah, I'll give you one of mine. It's Jake Retzlaff at BYU, and I know that the quarterback there. I know that eyes are rolling, but the NFL has shown time and time again that they like traits, even if a player has an incomplete profile. Otherwise, if they're not consistent, Anthony Richardson, not a consistent player. I'm trying to think of who are some other guys, but Anthony Richardson is one that stands out. And so Jake Retzlaff has one of the strongest arms in the country in 2025. He'll have one of the strongest arms in the country. He can do it on the move. Does he throw the boneheaded ball kind of all the time? Yeah, he does. But there's going to be somebody that thinks that they can coach that out of him. As far as physical traits go, he has all the physical traits. So take Jake Retzlaff. I don't know if you need to take him in the first round, but I kind of feel the same way I felt about Rocco Becht. Like Rocco Becht, go ahead and pick him up because he might not be a first-round NFL. I think it's more likely that somebody like Retzlaff goes in the first round because he'll be looked at like a Jay Cutler type prospect or a Dwayne Haskins type prospect. This is a guy that has all the physical ability but hadn't been really consistent.
I wish he was bigger. He's only like 6'1", 200.
6'1".
He just isn't. I don't know. And it's been a weird route for him to get there. Like he played JUCO and like he didn't go on a mission. Obviously, he's Jewish. But I don't know what's the thing. Like I watch him and I'm like, I just don't feel great watching him. Like the results are pretty good at the end of the day. Like he wills the team to win a lot of the time, especially when they didn't have much of a run game this year. And that's what BYU wanted to do. I don't think the receivers were great either. Last year was a good player, but not like a difference maker. There was enough there to keep me interested. And he will come back next year, and I think he will be a guy to watch. But I'm not. I don't think the bull case is quite that strong, at least for me. But you're not having to take him, like you said, you're not having to take him high in drafts.
No.
You could probably get him in the 3rd, 4th round if you want him.
Yep. Who else you got?
Same guy we talked about earlier. I meant Moxley, right? I think he's a
wide receiver
round pick. Wide receiver Stanford. 2nd round pick. Might go at the end of the 1st because of how good his end of season was. I don't think he's a phenomenally talented player, but he is the best player in this room, and he had a really good true freshman season. Like that's a lot of check boxes. He's did what you needed to see for a guy you want to go top 12, right? Like is he the top? I'm trying to think who else there would be. Is he the top supplemental pick that isn't a freshman?
I don't know. I don't think.
I think there's a case. I think there's a case for him to be made, or with the ADP that it'll end up there. But he's a good player. I mean, like I said earlier, if he's going the 1st round, Ja'Cory Barney's going the end of the 2nd. I'd rather make that selection, but I have to put him on the list because he isn't owned in enough spots. Yeah,
no, I don't have a problem with that. And you have to draft players who are going to have, that have high ceilings productivity wise. But I think Emmett Mosley might exist on the Keon Coleman or Nick Marsh at Michigan State spectrum. These guys who are longer contested catches who aren't necessarily elite separated. I tell you, I mean, there are some guys who get production, but their athletic profile might not be there. So when we're talking about Ja'Cory, I think Ja'Cory Barney's an excellent athlete. Ja'Cory Barney seems like a guy that has NFL athletic traits. I don't know that Emmett Mosley does. This is a different type of player in that respect. So
yeah, good player, but nothing not necessarily for the NFL.
Yeah. All right, I'll give you another one of mine. I'll go through a couple of them. Kanye Udo, formerly of Army, now of Arizona State, who's going to take running back. Kanye Udo, who's going to take over for Cam Scatabo. That's a perfect. Arizona State is a team on the rise. They're going to keep Sam Levitt. They're going to keep Jordan Tyson. Now you just slide in. You're going to slide in this running back who was as productive as he was for Army. now for Arizona State. I think it makes a lot of sense. I was trying to see what Kanye Udo did as far, because I know their quarterback did a lot of the rushing this year, but Kanye Udo averaged 5 yards per attempt this season. You're talking about 6'0", 215, perfect size. He had 179 carries for 1,117 yards and 10 touchdowns. We don't know what he can do on the ground, as far as catching the ball, but we're going to find out at Arizona State. He's just I love the player that's 5'11", 6 foot, 200 plus 10 pounds, and sliding right in there for Cam Scatterbo. Kanye Udo might be a player that I say you got to take in the first round at the end of the first round, because this freshman running back class is not what previous. It's not the Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs class. It's just not. So Kanye Udo might need to slide in there at the end of the first round as far as supplemental drafts go.
He doesn't have the receiving upside. Or we haven't. Let me say this: we have
know.
not seen receiving upside for Udo yet. They just don't like. That's just not part of what the offense Army runs. I don't know that he can't do it. There were other backs that were tasked to do it, like Noah Short. It'll be interesting, but I love like body size, like running style. Like, I don't think you could have a better replacement for Scatterbo than Udo. I love his upside, especially on the ground. Don't know what the receiving looks like. So that keeps me from first round, but I mean, you're gonna have to take him the second probably.
Yeah,
and I not sure I really have an issue with that.
Yeah. Another couple of guys, Davion Goss, the running back, is going to fill in for Amarian Hampton at North Carolina. I would consider him. I don't know what that team is going to look like with Bill Belichick, but Davion Goss, another 220-pound player. He's built in the mold of a Amarian Hampton. It seems like that's what North Carolina like there. By the way, Bill Belichick liked that style of runner too, from Corey Dillon to Ramondre Stevenson. I mean, they always had a big who's Jonas Gray. Y'all remember Jonas Gray from Notre Dame, who had the 3 touchdowns and then got kicked off the team? I mean, Bill Belichick has always liked that type of player. So I know that Mac Brown isn't there anymore, but I think Davion Goss could still be a centerpiece of that offense. Hoss Haney, one of the fastest white boys I've ever seen at the quarterback position. I mean, going to Oklahoma State. Austin and Colin talked about that landing spot there. Not the traditional Mike Gundy quarterback, but he's one of the guys who might be the best athlete on the field anytime he steps onto the field. So I'd like him. Reese Poffenbarger, we talked about him transferring from Miami, going to North Texas, taking Chandler Morris's reps there for Eric Morris is the head coach there, right? So he's got the spread system. I mean, that Reese Poffenbarger can run too. He can run too and throw it around. He kind of reminds me of, Dollar Store Zach Wilson. So now he's taking that to North Texas. I really like that from the CFS perspective. SMU's Kevin Jennings is still on in the player pool some places. Kevin Jennings, a guy who's probably going to score he's going to have a floor of 20 points per game because he can run. I know he didn't have a great game against Penn State, but I would still draft him. And then Darrell Robinson from UConn. UConn just getting players out there that are transferring. Darrell Robinson, the running back, transferring to Auburn. I would consider him. It's really I'm a little skeptical when these players transfer, running back transfers from G5 to Power 5. Or really any player. But I would consider him, Darrell Robinson. And then if Jordan Tyson is for some reason he's definitely I would spend a top 5 pick on Jordan Tyson. If Jordan Tyson for some reason is in your player pool, he's a top 5 pick. I mean, if you took him after Bryce Underwood at number 2, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I would take him over Kamario Taylor or Deuce Knight or whoever you think is in the running for the number 2 overall pick in your freshman and supplemental drafts, if Jordan Tyson is still out there.
I probably would take him for both quarterbacks, but he's certainly a first round pick if he's available. And he might be. I mean, people cut him last year, coming off like that. I mean, a lot of the times these injuries take a full year, right? He was injured at the end of season in Colorado, transfers to Arizona State, kind of a lost year, comes back this year, and it's awesome. Like NFL top 2 round, awesome. Like that's where I think he can get drafted. So I'm not gonna fight you on that one either. Is Hoss Haney essentially just like discount Avery Johnson?
Yeah, I was actually thinking that he is. Yeah, he is very, very similar. Yeah.
Like that's kind of how I view him, and I think you're going to get him at a big discount considering how much people liked Avery Johnson this offseason. I got a few left. Yannick Smith, a guy that I've talked about quite a bit, kind of down the stretch as he stepped into more of a starter role. He's going to be the wide receiver one, I think, at ECU, and I like the way the ECU's offense is trending with Canton Hauser. Really solid player who emerged as a true freshman, and he was kind of a highly rated recruit in terms of like ECU. They kept him around, and that was, I think, a big keep for them. Like, I think he was one of their biggest priorities in the portal. Chase Howell's gone. He's at Iowa State replacing Jaden Higgins, which I love that fit if he's available in your drafts. But I mean, I think Smith could be a 1,000-yard receiver next year. I really do. And he's not a guy that you're going to have to take high. I'm talking like mid-round selection.
Well, let's not forget, ECU used to be, a team that spread it out. I mean, that's where Lincoln Riley came from before he was at OU. He was at ECU throwing the ball around. So they have, some spread roots. And, Mason Garcia, big miss for me. Built like a quarterback. Well, the quarterback, Mason Garcia, built like a fullback and played like one, too. Jake got that start against Navy. No, Mason Garcia.
Previous ECU.
Yeah, Mason Garcia at ECU. Big 6'4", like 230-pound guy, 40-pound guy. He had been there high. He was a 4-star quarterback who went to ECU. Yeah. Just didn't turn out. So.
Yeah, I really like him.
You really like Canton Hauser.
Yeah, I like Canton Hauser, and I like Yannick Smith. I think it's a really good duo to enter the year. Like 6'3", 215. Like he made some really nice plays. And you go back to that Tulsa game, like he made some catches that were like wow catches for a freshman.
Yannick Smith had 434 yards receiving, average 17.4 per catch. So a couple of great freshman wide receivers there in the G5 between Joseph Williams now at Colorado and Yannick Smith, who's staying put.
Joseph Williams probably got added quite a bit in the season because he had a really, really strong stretch. But Smith really only had one game where he flashed major. So I think you can still get him like pretty reasonably. There's a couple FCS transfers that I think are interesting. Giovanni Gibson is one of them. I talked about him, I think, 2 weeks ago, coming from Arkansas Pine Bluff to Oklahoma, kind of a depleted room. The other guy that I think is interesting is Jordan Dwyer going to TCU. He is from Idaho. He's that build of like 6 foot, 195 type receivers who are like kind of all their age now. That seems to be the ideal body type for like what teams are wanting, especially in the NFL. It's a pretty empty room. Savion's gone. Jack Besh is gone. Eric McAllister returns. Eric McAllister was like not even starting half the year, even though they paid him a really big NIL check to come. I think he could step in as the one, and I like the way that Josh Hoover is playing. I like the way that the offensive production exists, like from a fantasy perspective. So Dwyer's a guy that I think is going to go like last round of drafts because I think the assumption is it's going to be McAllister. Just got to keep an eye on. I mean, he had a great season at Idaho this year, and like Idaho
he had 1,100 yards, almost 1,200 yards receiving, 12 touchdowns. 6 foot 195, really Jordan Dwyer.
Yeah, really solid player. That I am not convinced is a worse player than Eric McAllister. So TCU potential wide receiver one, we saw how valuable that was this year. Like Savion Williams had how many, like 15 target games.
Yeah. I mean, obviously he added some rushing production there, but TCU wants to spread the ball out and throw it. They were not able to get the ball to get the ground game running with Cam Cook this year. Did TCU add a running back? I'm trying to. Do you know?
Yeah, they added Kavorian Barnes from UTSA.
Oh yes, they did. And I'm a Kavorian Barnes fan. He's got that small, stout build. And he's much faster than you would expect for a player of that build. Explosive player.
He had that one offseason where he added like 30 pounds. And
they do that at UTSA. They did the same thing is it UTSA? Sincere McCormick did the same thing. And I'm like, oh my God, why did he get so big?
I'm not sure I'm in on Kavorian Barnes anymore. I was like 2 years ago and 3 years ago. I'm not sure that that ship has sailed or not.
I'll be rostering him. I'll be rostering him there at TCU. He's better than Cam Cook. He's better than Cam Cook, and that's an offense that should score points.
Yeah.
All right, what takeaways, Mox? Let's recap the 2024 season. Just reflect and let it wash over you. It was a great season from a interesting college football, a revenue standpoint, underdog, the video game. But what other takeaways do you have from college fantasy in 2024?
Yeah, so as the schedule kind of warps itself and you see changes throughout the conferences and how many conference games are getting played and when they're scheduled and the addition of a second bye, I think schedule is something that I'm paying more attention to in seasonal leagues than maybe I was prior. Like if I am considering taking a player and that player has a playoff bye, like Oregon did this year, like Washington did this year, like USC, I think had a bye in the championship 2 years ago. Like you were down Caleb Williams. You don't want to be in that spot. It's something that is in the back of my mind as like a tiebreaker sometimes. Like it's going to keep happening as we have more buys throughout the season. Like that's just how the schedule works. Or if you're playing week 0, you might have 3 buys. Like that happened to SMU this year. Do you want to be down a player when you have a similar opinion about a player and like that you're considering selecting in the same spot? This is way more like college fantasy skewed, but it is something that I think you need to think about at least a little bit.
Yeah, I've got a few here. It's not lost upon me that the top 2 quarterbacks that we expect to go into the NFL draft are 5 fifth-year starters. And Michael Penix Jr. was a 5th-year starter at Washington and Indiana last year. Like the spreadsheet simp community trying to tell you that a player needs to come out after their 3rd year to be good. That's just like, it's just not true. Like if they figure it out and they take a jump from year 4 to year 5, that's fine. And they can still command, high draft capital. Wasn't Jaden Daniels a 5-year starter too?
So was Bo Nix.
So yeah, like all of these guys. So when people are saying Drew Aller needs to make the jump to the NFL, no, he doesn't. Drew Aller needs to stay in college. And as a matter of fact, if he wanted to stay after next year, I'd be fine with that also. So yeah, the 5th-year player at the quarterback position, I wouldn't be scared off by it. Sam Leavitt getting kind of a late start because he didn't start at Michigan State. So Sam Leavitt kind of figuring out there at Arizona State. I think I've learned that projecting something. What am I trying to say? These guys who are getting playing time for the first time, they can be difficult to project. It's easier, like a player like Ja'Cory Barney, to project them going from 400 yards receiving their freshman year to 800 yards receiving their sophomore year than it is to project a guy who did nothing in year 1 to doing something in year 2. Lenore Sellers, we thought he was going to rip college football off, and he kind of did the second half of the season. But the first half of the season, I was like, ooh, when he was throwing for 120 yards and running for 70, I was like, I don't know. Maybe I was wrong about this guy. Justice Haynes. I thought Justice Haynes would be one of the best backs from a productivity standpoint in college football this year, even though, Jam Miller was there. It just didn't happen. So, I'm just kind of mindful of that, of projecting something that I haven't seen happen. I was very high on Justin Jolie coming into the season. Well, Justin Jolie had a great season last year at UConn. I just kind of projected him to do the same thing in a system that highlights his say. By the way, you see that they got rid of Robert and I? They bought his contract out. Did you see that?
Yeah, I'm not sure he's got the juice. I think a lot of that success was Bronco Men and Hall at Virginia. I think the ship might have sailed on Robert and I.
Okay.
But I don't like who they promoted. It was now I'm on the spot. Former South Carolina offense coordinator. I'd say downgrade, and I didn't really like the way I was trending.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's still interesting. He's one of the better pass catchers on that team, so I would expect him to have a great season next year too. Hopefully, the freshman, can He had some ups and downs this year, but hopefully, what's the quarterback? CJ Bailey. Hopefully
I like the way CJ Bailey's trending. I thought
I do
for
too.
a first season like that was good enough.
I thought so too. These are all like campus to Canton takeaways, not like true traditional college fantasy takeaways. But time and time again, the NFL shows me that they prefer players with traits if they have an incomplete profile otherwise. And I talked about this earlier on the show. Michael Penix Jr., elite arm talent, even though he had the multiple ACL injuries. Anthony Richardson was not great as a one-year starter. To me, that informs my opinion of Jake Retzlaff, who I mentioned already. Lenore Sellers, who I think is trending to be a top 3 overall pick. I mean, he's going to be there with Drew Aller. Arch Manning will be there also, but you can't tell me that an NFL team, this guy can run and throw and do everything he can. I think Lenore Sellers is trending to be a top 3 NFL pick. But let's not forget Avery Johnson, folks. Avery Johnson has elite traits. Okay. He has elite traits. Maybe he's not as consistent as you'd want him. But yeah, I mean, that's a guy that I need to have rostered. Jane Mayava at USC. He has some elite traits. And I'm just saying this in comparison to guys like Rocco Becht at Iowa State, Josh Hoover at TCU. I don't know that those guys have the physical profile of some of the other guys that I've mentioned. And again, the NFL has shown a tendency to prefer. So Hoover and Becht are really polished to me, but again, don't have the physical ceiling. Retzlaff, not polished, higher physical ceiling. Avery Johnson, not polished, higher physical ceiling. And we see the NFL prefer those guys. So I would just keep that in mind. As Deuce Knight is going to be a very polarizing player in freshman drafts this year. Hasn't played a ton of college football, a ton of high school football. Super athletic. Finished his high school career with a losing record. But still elite physical traits in comparison to somebody like Lewis, who's going to Colorado, going to back up Caden Salter there. Julian Lewis, a lot of passes, a lot of production. Deuce Knight, not a lot of that, but an elite physical profile. So just keeping that in mind and understanding that as I'm drafting players is, a takeaway that I'll take into 2025.
I think it's interesting because normally I think NFL GMs operate so conservatively in terms of what they do and like just in general. But you see, they want to be tied to the highest upside outcome at the quarterback position. Because if you don't get quarterback right in the draft, you're back to square one. You're probably getting fired. So it makes sense to me to target that at a quarterback level. I don't know that I am doing the same at other positions, right? Like if you are running back and you're just like super toolsy, you can't run. Like
Cam Seldon. Cam Seldon. Yeah. Cam Seldon.
Cam Seldon. You're Quentin Martin. You're Nick Singleton to an extent, although he's just like such a freak athlete that I'm not really sure it matters, and he's such a good pass catcher. But those players like need to be better technically than
at the wide receiver position. Somebody like Cordell Russell. I'm like, this guy.
Jurion Dickey's the one that always comes to mind. I'm like, this dude's all tools, can't play.
I think Jurion Dickey was a great technical player also, in addition to having physical talent. Like, I would not put Jurion Dickey in the same boat as like Cordell Russell.
He has like two snaps.
No, he had the knee injury coming in, man. He had the knee injury coming in. I'm gonna defend Jurion Dickey.
Oh my gosh. He had 2 catches in his true freshman season. But if you aren't technical enough at the receiver position or the running back position, you're not getting on the field.
That's another player who needs to enter the transfer portal. Jurion Dickey, go to North Texas with Reese Poffenbarger, so you can
Jurion Dickey, Reese Poffenbarger, 1,500 yard connection.
Absolutely.
I like that. But yeah, I'm way more wary than maybe I was drafting those skill position players outside quarterback that just don't have the like I drafted a ton of Cam Seldon. Like he's basically like a waste of a roster spot for 2 years because he just can't play. Like he just can't play running back. And I don't even think he can play receiver, which he's transitioning to now.
And listen, you know, I don't like to say I told you so, but after we watched that spring game, I was like, this dude is he might be a great athlete, but he does not look like a running back. They might need to move him back to wide receiver and just use him around the line of scrimmage like Laviska Shenault.
Cam Seldon?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's going to be a wide receiver at Virginia Tech this year.
Oh, he is moving to wide receiver?
Yeah,
okay.
At least that's a report. I
okay.
Use him like Laviska Shenault. That's a great point. Like keep him in that vein. Just get the ball in his hands, in space, and let him do something like that. That's how these players are going to succeed. But that is such a limited role when you're projecting to the next level. Like you don't want to be relying on that. Like look at what Laviska Shenault did. Nothing.
Yep. Our hearts go out to those affected by the tragedy in New Orleans and the Sugar Bowl being moved to tomorrow. It's just a senseless act of violence. I don't think it would be right unless we said something about it. Just a tragedy. All right. Apologies to Kirk Herbstreit. We ran out of time. We'll get him rescheduled soon. For Chris Moxley, I'm Felix Sharpe. Happy New Year, y'all. Good night. Good luck.